All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to After Church Tea Time. Today, we're going to be talking and discussing about what we received during today's Church of Unions service on healing attachment to experience divine love by Valentina. And I really enjoyed this sermon because I find that one of the biggest lessons on the twin flame journey is learning how to release attachment to the outcome, to your twin flame, to pretty much anything and everything, and really learning how to look to God as your source and be able to truly go to just the source of everything without having to look outside of you and seek things outside of you. And so for me, one of the biggest upsets that I had at the beginning of the journey was just chasing and seeking love, validation, reassurance, confirmation outside of myself. And it really drained me on such a deep level that there was many times where I just wanted to give up because I wasn't seeing the results or the confirmation that I was seeking. But once I really healed this pattern of looking outside of myself and releasing those attachments and going straight to God, that's when it felt like all of the resistance kind of just fell away and things just started to flow and align for me. And it's because I was learning that everything that I was seeking was directly from God and not outside of me. So I really loved many, many points that she touched on in this sermon and looking forward to really just digest all of it.
Yeah, same. I feel like we've all experienced this on the twin flame journey at some point, some form of attachment. Because
Mhm.
you're like, love is here, twin flames, this is magical. And we all even have those moments, even when like we know the teachings of union, where that can kind of like slip in, and all of a sudden we're like looking for our twin flame to provide something for us, or it can come up in family relationships, it can come up in any area of life.
Mhm.
It's just basically like the beginning of a horrible experience. Like that's just when everything just feels terrible and all of a sudden you're stressed out and anxious and what used to be fun isn't fun anymore. Like attachment is something that it's really important to identify, and you want to identify it fast because you do not want to be on that train for a long time.
Yeah. You touch on like the contrast that really will arise from trying to get something outside of yourself.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that used to frustrate me the most was the saying that everything that you seek is within you. And I'm
Mhm.
like, then where is it? And I would get so mad about
You're
it.
a liar.
Exactly. Like there's no answer here. But the more that I learned to just go to God, it would just naturally come up or it would start to manifest itself. And
Mhm.
I found that being able to relax into that really made this journey more fun, more adventurous, more easy. It was easier to like not take things personally when you didn't attach to someone showing up a certain way, or even more, not having to need someone to show up a certain way for you to feel better, and learning
Mhm.
how to feel good and then watching those things unfold because you feel good within. And so for me, that really started to shift the dynamic of my union. And you touched on it, like we still have moments even though we have this work where we still will go back into that pattern. And luckily our twin flames will discipline us there in that space, just like Valentina talked about how Madhu does that for her. It's like, nope, like I'm not your source, and this is not the way that it feels good to have our union this way. It feels very just it doesn't it feels like I didn't understand this at first, but it is a very repulsing energy to have someone want something from you or need something from you in order to make them feel better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like when you're, in a relationship, living with someone or spending a lot of time with someone who looks at you that way. It's like another job. You
Mhm.
feel that burden, you feel that pressure. It just feels really like you can't relax in the relationship, and you're not able to like fully be yourself because there's so many demands. It just feels really, really heavy and just not sustainable for
Mhm.
sure. I feel like something too that Valentina talked about was, really like God is that person. Like, like God is she used the
Mhm.
saying of blood is thicker than water, and how like God is like ultimately the person
Mhm.
that we're with even more than anyone else. And I feel like that's a big reminder because I know for me, like anytime that I formed attachment, it was because I didn't feel either safe or I didn't feel like I could trust God that I could get my
Mhm.
needs met. Kind of like what you're talking about, like, where is it? Like you have to like really come to know that you can access what you need on the inside. Like you don't have to be attached to something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, the more that I've paid attention to that, the more that watching other relationships who may not be with their twin flame,
Mhm.
just how difficult that could be at times because they are not with ultimately their ultimate teacher. They may learn some things and they may work through blocks and upsets, but to really be in a relationship with your ultimate teacher who teaches you to look to God, who
Mhm.
will direct you back to God, is really such a gift because I've had quite a few relationships where they will seek answers or support from outside of themselves and from people that don't actually align with our relationship or our connection. And then it creates even more contrast. And she said, he said, and this was advice that I received. And then it just creates even more of a mess. But with a twin flame union, when you're truly operating from a place of God being your source, anytime you have a problem, you go directly to God. And I've learned that when I've healed my upsets with God, it's almost like the upset didn't even really occur with my twin flame. And it used to frustrate me because I would go to God and I would heal the upset. And then my twin flame would be like, la da 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 da, it's fine now. And I'm like, wait, like, let's come back to this. And sometimes it would require a conversation with my twin flame, but other times it was like, it was forgiven, let it go, move forward. And that is a deep relief to be able to do that within your union and also to create boundaries of doing that with other people in your life
Yeah.
because it's a transition from going to giving to all these other people to then putting your union with God, yourself, and your twin flame first. And that
Mhm.
requires having to release a lot of attachments to the relationships that you built prior to coming into union with your twin flame.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up like the difference of like working through the stuff with your twin flame and the fact that you're able to just move through it so easily because it is a weird thing that doesn't happen with anybody else. Like I mean, like whenever there's like divine love in a relationship, obviously you're always safe to like draw boundaries and grow and evolve in the relationship. But with a twin flame union, like that turnaround time, I mean, it's instant, right? Because they choose with you, so you're just like always on the same page. So that's one thing that's nice. Yeah, and it also is a reminder that only love is real. So that's actually the only thing that matters. So all this other stuff, we notice that we're doing it, we're like, okay, and then you make the correction and you just move on. Like, hallelujah. Don't have to stay.
Yeah. With everyone else, you're like, wait, you don't make the same choice as me? Like,
Yeah, yeah, right. And then you have to like talk it out and then you have to compromise and communicate and all of that to figure it out. And like sometimes it can be hard. I know for me, probably the biggest challenge I have found with this is with other relationships, like with family relationships, like stepping back and like creating boundaries where there weren't boundaries before. And with family, you're talking like lifelong relationships where it's been a certain way for a very long time. And then all of a sudden you're like, let's talk about this. We're not going to do this anymore. And sometimes that can be challenging. I don't know if you've experienced that, but like, it can also like really challenge the relationship and like help you kind of see, how to connect in healthier ways. And it can be really healing for the other people in that relationship as well, even if they're not on this journey, like just to talk about stuff like that. Because for
Mhm.
so many people, attachment is like the norm for relationships. And so it's like a little bit of a healing journey you go on, but it's so worth it to heal these things.
Absolutely. And yeah, that is something I did have to experience even with my own mother. And I know Valentina spoke on this too. And that is probably one of, if not our first attachment, is to our mom. And so for me, there was a lot of just very toxic patterns that were being played out and it required boundaries. And I remember thinking, like, God, if I like let go of this attachment, I'm going to end up alone. And God was like, no, you're not. And so after setting that boundary, I went from seeing my mother every day to just a few times a month, or yeah, a few times a month to like now at this point it's just been a few times every month, and it's actually become a very healthy situation for the both of us, and we
Yeah.
both had to learn not to depend on each other in a very codependent way. And at first it did irritate her at first because she got to this place where she felt like, oh, you don't need me anymore and you're fine on your own. And when I really sat back with that, I was like, A mom who's in a healthy space would have been like, yes, she doesn't need me to be
Yeah.
able to survive and to take care of herself. Like, I did well raising her, and I can trust that God's got her. And so that really encouraged me to get into that space with my own children, of
Mhm.
realizing, yes, they need me, and at a certain level of making sure they're provided for and taken care of and all those things, and nurturing them with love, but also being able to teach them how to cultivate that within themselves, of learning how
Mhm.
to go to God. And that's probably been one of the most enjoyable things about being a parent myself, is teaching them how to have that relationship with God. And ultimately, anytime they have an upset, I'll invite them, like, okay, we'll go with him. What does God say? And at first I thought that was going to be hard, but for kids, like, they're so resilient, and they're also the closest thing to source, that they're like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, God's my parent. Let me go see what God says here.
Yeah.
And so it's really wonderful to be able to really see the difference between someone who's truly in a healthy space and aligned with divine love, and someone who is in not such a healthy space and who is in alignment with like separation and lack.
Mhm.
And it's ultimately two different relationships. So learning to release attachment to a parent figure or someone who ultimately raised you feels very difficult at first, and it can feel kind of lonely. But when you go to God for that, God was very loving and provided two women in my life who were in much more healthier spaces, who gave me that motherly love that I still desired, but from a
Mhm.
place of unconditional love, not what can you give me because I just gave to you.
Yeah. And that can be hard to like if that's all you know, to like have a completely different experience in that space. It's like what it's like a different language, right? In a relationship of like, oh, this is how conflict is handled. Oh, this is how, like when when something comes up and it's like very personal to me and like you don't understand it, this is how like there's respect playing out in this
Mhm.
relationship. And really giving each other space to grow and like really like pointing people to themselves because you want to see the people that you love in your life feeling empowered and you want to see them getting to know themselves more and like honoring themselves. And so it's just like a whole new world of really it's like a completely different relationship.
It really is. Hmm.
Yeah. I think too, like what you're talking about with mothers is, it's also showing non-attachment to the type, like the form of the relationship or like the way the relationship manifests, because like when children are really young, it's obviously a different kind of relationship than when they're adults. And it's also like having non-attachment to like letting the relationship evolve,
Hmm.
allowing that to change.
Yeah, it is. Um, Oh, exactly that, allowing it to change, allowing it to expand, because I think sometimes we have like, a cap of how much the relationship can expand, and sometimes that's the truth about some relationships. It can only go so far
Yeah.
before you have to release it and let it go. And I think one of the biggest lessons that I had to learn was, um, recognizing that relationships have a contract in some sense. You have some relationships that are going to stay with you for a lifetime, and for us that's soul family, and then you have other relationships that come for a season and they teach you some things, and then you got to let them go, and maybe you'll come back together and it'll be a more loving relationship. But for the most part, it comes down to recognizing that this is a big shift for me, is that all of the relationships that I'm having is only one relationship with God. And so
Mhm.
when I really focused on that, this really allowed me to let go of those attachments and to really
Yeah.
just like depend on God. And the first time I heard that it was safe to be needy with God, I was like, oh, thank God. Like, I was really cursing God, and God's like, perfect.
I have somewhere to put this. Yeah.
So I was so relieved.
Yeah. Well, we need love,
Yeah.
It's like this isn't and to be clear, like this isn't about numbing out to your desire for love. It's not like, "Oh, I don't need any I'm cold inside. I need nothing, no
Right.
love. No love in my life." This is because love isn't the same as attachment. And I feel like that's really what Valentina was pointing out is like there's love and then there's attachment and it's safe to like pull those apart, and like really look at the difference.
Yeah.
Um yeah, it's really safe to do that and two, like, knowing that God is within and that love is never lost, like, that's something from the teachings of union that I was just reminded of as you were sharing about, like, how love is never lost. We get attached to form and we get attached to, I have this is my best friend and this is who this person is to me, and it's
Mhm.
like that kind of attachment. but realizing that it's God moving through your best friend, and that's
Mhm.
what feels so good about that relationship, is that God is there. And God is with you no matter who you're in a relationship with. And if that changes, that's okay. And God's going to move through in exactly that same kind of divine way that you feel so great about in a new way. And it's really actually seeing that it's God that we're in love with. It's God that we want to spend time with. It's God that we want to connect with. And it's safe to be with God in any area of life and in any way.
Absolutely. I think even with like the best friend, there even came a moment where I was like, well, this is my best friend. And my coach was like, who's actually your best friend? And I was like, God. And she's like, uh-huh. And I was like, she's like, your twin flame? I was like, oh, I have an upset here. I was like,
It's
oh,
easier to pick this one than that one.
it really is. And so it had to get to a point where I realized that there were relationships that I was attached to that wasn't allowing my union to manifest into that space,
Mhm.
because I hadn't really allowed myself to recognize that my ultimate lover is God. And it's
Yeah.
God who manifests through my physical ultimate lover, my twin flame, to fill those spaces as well. And so there was some learning curves that I had to have there, because I was like, well, he doesn't feel like my best friend. Like, and I had to really move through some deep upsets around that. But once I cleared those things, that really shifted, because for your union, it starts with ultimate best friend foundation. Other than them being your teacher, you will find that building that friendship with your twin flame is really a solid foundation to building being ultimate lovers and partners with each other. And so there were many places where I had to look at those areas of where I was trying to fulfill it with other people and not realizing that's actually the space for my twin flame. And then there was also places where I had to allow myself to not project my previous relationships or my relationships with my family onto my twin flame, because I was attached to those outcomes. I was attached to
Mhm.
how it unfolded and the hurt that I received there and that energy of victimhood. And I started to project it onto my twin flame. And that's a fast way to self sabotage your union. So I do not recommend it.
Mhm.
But ultimately, it was, yeah, recognizing also that every upset that you have with anyone in your life is an upset with God. And so
Mhm.
to be able to hone up into that understanding, which I learned from the teachings of union, that really started to shift all of my relationships, but specifically shift the dynamic of my union.
Mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think about something that Shaleia shared one time where I think it was a post somewhere where she was talking about how like no one's attention is more valuable to her than her own. And was just pointing to this thing of like no one's able to like love her the way that she can love herself, you
Yep.
know? And, like, if you really sit with that, like, it's true. Like, the reason that people like their twin flame so much is because that's them and they love themselves, actually. They're just, like, confused about what they're looking at? At the end of the day, we're all kind of in love with ourselves. And it's true that, like, nobody knows you the way that you are able to know you and be with you. Like, even your twin flame, like, yes, like, you guys share one consciousness, but, like, they're not in your experience of your consciousness and like having this moment with God that you're having. And so yeah, like really like seeing that for what it is. And I feel like
Mhm.
that's really like the message with this is just like really looking at what is a relationship and like
Mhm.
how to have a healthy relationship. And yeah, it doesn't get better than our relationship with God. It really doesn't. No one can really replace that. We get glimpses of God through all these different things, but at the end of the day, like our experience is always going to be within.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that has come into my consciousness is, especially for those who are new to this work, would be like, well, if I'm having a negative or bad relationship with someone, is that me having a relationship with God in that space too, and
Mm.
seeing God in like a negative way? But in truth, it's like that person is mirroring to you the place where you're actually experiencing separation from God and
Mhm.
not experiencing that divine love with God. And
Mhm.
so, coming back to what I said, it was like every upset that you have is with God,
Mhm.
because you believe that you're either not good enough or not worthy of love or not deserving of your good in that space. And so, when you're having a contrastic experience with someone in your reality and you're attached to the upset, you're attached to what's coming up, that's what keeps you in the really bad feeling. But what
Mhm.
I've been so grateful for with this work is that it really allows me to release attachment to the upset and who's delivering the upset, because in truth they're just the messenger, really. And they're unconditionally loving me by triggering this space within me that is out of alignment with love. And so I think that that could be kind of a confusing experience for people who are coming to having their own relationship with God and building an intimate relationship with God and feeling like, well, God made me go through this, or God did this to me. But we also co-create our reality. And so what we're already experiencing within will manifest outwardly. And we get a choice. We get free will to either continue that choice in that pattern, or we can look to God and choose to heal that using the mirror exercise and coming into true alignment with love in that space. And then you will start to feel instant relief, and you'll start to see things shift in your outer reality, which is what I truly love about this work, is that you can change absolutely anything in your life that does not feel good.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you shared that because that's so important. I feel like navigating this stuff, you do like a lot of self-reflection, and it's really important to like really look at, your spiritual teaching, no matter, whatever your religion is, whatever it is your path, but to look at, what love is and to come to know what does love look like? What does love feel like? And find that within yourself and to know that, yeah, like if we find things in our lives or in relationships that are not actually loving in some way, like we can transcend that. We want to choose love. Love is what this is actually really about, and non-attachment allows us to experience something like love. uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's always safe and to be non-attached to those unhealthy patterns and things too, to let that
Mhm.
go.
Yeah, what you bring up, and they talk about this in romance attraction course, is like we what we know love to be is what we see in those rom-coms in
Mm.
Hollywood. And
Yeah.
there's so much attachment in those movies, or that
Yeah.
I need her to love me, or I need him to see
Yeah.
me, and this is ridiculous because they don't love me. And I had to really ask myself that, like, what is truly love? Like, how do I truly desire to be loved? And
Mm.
how do I show up and love people? Am I loving people unconditionally, or do I have some type of intention underneath that to receive back something?
Mhm.
To really learn how to unconditionally show up and love people and to love God's children because He's called me to, without any attachment or expectation of how that love's going to come back to me. That has really shifted the way that I show up and the way that I choose to have my relationship. So I love that you really touch on what truly is love. And to me, having a background in Christianity, like I always revert to like thinking of how Jesus loved people. Sometimes he had to discipline them. Sometimes he had to give them the real truth. And then sometimes he just held space for them and just loved
Mhm.
them without having to need them to do anything. He just
Mhm.
unconditionally loved them. And so that was something that I had to really learn, and having to learn that after 20, at the time when I came to this community, I was 25. 25 years of what you think love is, and then have a rude awakening of like, that's not actually love. Like,
Love
that
isn't people pleasing. It's not your
this is
yeah.
facts. It can feel like an identity crisis. It can feel
Yeah.
like things
It's
are
definitely
falling.
an unraveling.
It is. It is. And so I really encourage, for those who are listening and those who are taking that next step in their twin flame journey and ascension journey, to really um, receive the support that's here, because there's so many places that you're unraveling and having to heal your consciousness, because that's just the pattern and the programming you've known for so long. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no need to judge it or to feel shameful about it. But it really is going to require um, a daily choice of showing up and being present with yourself, and really asking, like, is this loving, not only to other people, but is this loving to me?
Mhm.
Do I really feel loved here? And if not, then it's time to really feel into it and check into what might need to shift and change in order for you to truly have a loving relationship and to be wealthy in love. That's a really big
Mhm.
one, as I think a lot of people think that wealth is just money. But you can really be wealthy in love, and it will radiate from the inside out.
Yeah, And then you get paid.
And you get paid. Absolutely. And you attract abundance and
Then you
opportunity.
start showing up in other areas.
And your twin flame, you get all these things.
A
So,
lot of mirror, the mirror goes both ways. You start
it
to
really
see,
does.
start to see that change. It's good. Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking about like it does take work to do what you're talking about, like taking inventory and like really taking the time to reflect, like how do my relationships feel to me? And you might even notice it like when you're picking up the phone talking to somebody that you talk to every day, where you're like, wait, how does this actually feel to me? Like notice, take the time. But it's so worth it because love is the greatest thing in the universe. It's the thing that we're all really after. It's God. And so like to take this time, like it's one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself, in my opinion, is just like taking that time to explore this, to, learn the teachings of union if this is your spiritual path, but to really like learn what love is and explore that for yourself and to choose love uncompromisingly. I don't know if uncompromisingly is a word, but to really like be clear there and to decide like, hey, this is the standard. If it's
Yep,
not love, it can go. It's okay. We can let that one
exactly.
go.
Have no attachment. It can go.
Yeah, no attachment. Exactly.
Oh, I love that. All
Hello,
right.
heaven. Moving on.
Yeah,
Ain't got time for that anymore.
you get to have your heaven on earth, guys. You don't have
Yes, it's real.
to. Perfect.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm feeling complete here. How are you feeling?
Yes, feeling complete. Great discussion. Great topic.
It was. It was beautiful. Thank you so much, Valentina, for this beautiful sermon.
Yes.
And thank you all for joining us. And if you're feeling guided to support more of these sermons and just getting this word out around how to truly love others and to receive love, definitely check out Tithing at the Church of Union. And you can find that at unionism.org. And we will plan to see you guys next Sunday for after church tea time again. And you guys all take care and have a blessed week.
All right. Thank you guys for joining us.